What is up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. Today is going to be quite a long video as I would like to share my list of the albums that I consider to be the best of the decade. I had seen a few people's lists on albums they consider to be the best of the decade, and then I thought to myself, I would like to share a list of mine, but this is not a complete list, as after this list in the video, I would like to add in some more albums to expand and grow this list. And also there were some albums that I thought that I rated when I reviewed them way too high, and they will be lowered down because the albums I put in this list are more of the favorites. This is in no particular order, by the way. Let's just jump right into this list. The first album, Deafheaven with Sunbather. This album is absolutely fantastic. I really do like this style of production. Deafheaven's one of those bands that they can come up with music that at some points has some beautiful effects and layers on the guitar playing to the very dark, heavy sound of their black metal sound. And they put in some more textures into their sound, and that's what I really like about this band. And Sunbather is definitely a great example of music that can be put into different aspects, from the beautiful soft elements to the whole sound of the band really blasting through with their own aggression into their songwriting. The next album in the list is Iron Maiden, The Book of Souls. I don't really need to talk about this album very much because I had talked about it before, and I still place this as one of my top 10 favourite Iron Maiden albums. I thought some of the inspirations from the songwriting on Steve's mind was really great, and I think that this still contains some of Iron Maiden's strongest material in a very long time. Bruce's vocals to me are an improvement than what he did on The Final Frontier, which I did like. But I think that the sounds and the structures on this album feel really focused and contains a very big peek into the sound of the songwriting involving different instruments to make the tone of the album feel different. But I think this is really one of their strongest albums. The next album is My Bloody Valentine's MBV. This is their comeback album, released 20 plus years after the release of their classic album Loveless in '91. And this band, being one of my favourites of all time, is still one of my favourites in just the experimentation and the sound of the band as a whole. MBV is an album that I really like so much because of its big variation. There's a bit of some dancey-esque kind of beats to some experimentalism that involves some different visual effects, and the tone to the album is perfect. Love the vocals from Belinda Butcher's voice, and of course with Kevin Shields' signature guitar-driven sound of distorted, reverbed feedback like the previous albums. Isn't Anything is an excellent debut album, and Loveless obviously being the classic, one of my big favourite albums of all time in experimentalism, but MBV is still one of the best albums of the decade. The next album is, for me, my favourite album of the last decade, and that is Death Grips The Money Store. And I know that they've released other albums later on after this, but The Money Store was an album that was so interesting yet original for its time and to this very day. The instrumentation can be just crazy, bombastic, wild, and very, very intriguing. The experimental hip-hop trio that can pull anything off on their own craft. And this had become one of my favourite albums of all time. The moments that I listen to this album so many times and just become so addicted into something new and exciting like this album. The next album is a triple album, and that is Swans to Be Kind. Now, I know that this album has been picked for many fans as their best, or some would say the seer, and they've released so many other albums in their different ways on sound, tone, and different genres. But To Be Kind was an album that really got me introduced to the band. And I know it's crazy because they've released many albums that are as influential and praised, but To Be Kind, in my eyes, was a perfect introduction. This album has been described in many different ways. The sound of the album is heavy, it's intense, uncompromising, and it's so noisy that it just feels like a brutal apocalypse, from the execution of the tracks being repetitive, but it's so intriguing at the same time that they just keep going on from these loops and loops of playing and build in some more sounds and texture. And that's what I love about this band. Michael Gira, being the leader of the band, is one of the geniuses in rock experimentalism to this very day. And To Be Kind is such an incredible album that it's just so describable by how tremendous and unique this album is. The next album is Deafheaven again, with the album New Bermuda. The reason why I put this album in the list, it is because that I sometimes prefer this album over Sunbather, whereas with Sunbather's sound have a brilliant sound and tone by itself, but I think with New Bermuda, it's a record that I would connect with more. I thought the production was better, I love the distorted tone to the aggressive sound on the drums, that's top notch, and their heavy black gaze sound is really consistent from start to finish, and they just really expand and progress into different ways as a band that can never ever make things that is like the same as before from previous materials. So New Bermuda is an absolutely excellent album to follow up Sunbather, though it would still be one of my big favourite albums of the decade. The Ocean Pelagial is up next, a German-based progressive metal band, surprised by how incredibly strong this album was. It is a great listening experience, and this was a recommendation from one of my friends, Patrick. Thank you very much if you are watching this, mate. And I really do see this album as an interesting one concept-wise, because the music just takes you into an experience. It is a brilliant concept album, from the way it was executed to some amazing production. Pelagial is still an album that I would really cite as one of those groundbreaking and tremendous releases that I never would have come across an album like this at all. The next album is Caladan Brood with Echoes of Battle. This album is incredible. I really like this album very much. The reason why I like it is because of the atmosphere. This band is atmospheric black metal, but there are some beautiful and gorgeous acoustic guitars to some of these low-key vocals, but with the immense enraged sound of the band's black metal expressions and tones. This album is really great for what it is, and besides that, the band had been known as like a similarity to Summoning, which are another fantastic atmospheric black metal style band, but Caladan Brood did blow me away for the way it was made, and the beautiful cover art as well really sums it up. Alcest with Icalis de Lune, I might have mispronounced that. I do apologize if I did. I really like the sound of the album. That was so gorgeous to listen to, from the soft touches of instrumentation and to the whole feelings and expression of what this album really takes you into. It's like the combination of the soft instrumentation with the black metal. Being one of the best bands outside the UK and the US, a French band, that they would release albums in various ways, and I think this second album is their best. The next album is going to bring back so many memories for me, and that is going to be Forged in Flame by Claim the Throne. Claim the Throne If you have not heard of this band at all, they are a fantastic and amazing folk metal / melodic death metal band from Australia, and Forged in Flame was an album that I highly enjoyed very, very much. You got the aggressive melodic death metal sound to the raspy, grunty vocals, passages of the guitar playing. This is just some fantastic piece of work, and once again I'm very forever grateful that they decided to credit my YouTube channel name as one of the thank yous at the back of this album's booklet. Thank you very much, Claim the Throne. You really mean a lot to me for that. So I highly recommend this album if you are into this kind of music, guys, and definitely seek out this band's brilliant discography. This next album is definitely a very unsettling, emotionally deep, but uncomfortably brave to pull this one off. The last album by David Bowie, Black Star. Black Star, with the concept of the album lyrically about Bowie's upcoming demise, to the inspirations from Bowie and Tony Visconti, the producer of loving music from Death Grips to Kendrick Lamar, LCD Soundsystem. This inspiration was high on this album. There are some moods to this album that were so dark but very well executed. We got sounds of some jazz stuff to some experimental electronic stuff, and I could hear some of the stuff that I had heard before on previous albums that are on this record. Bowie's vocals being at his most frail, he did a tremendous job. This album was powerful and a brilliant way to finish off the legendary musician's discography on such a high note. Though I wouldn't see it as one of the classics and one of the best of all time, but I would still rank this as one of Bowie's top 10 best, for sure. Danny Brown, Atrocity Exhibition. This is another album like The Money Store from Death Grips that I did not ever expect to hear something this crazy. I really like the hooks and the beats that was so damn brilliant, and Danny's vocals can be just, going from different ranges. He can go from a different tone and then go to a completely mentally insane kind of vocal passage, and it just makes this album so intriguing that this is one of those records that is so brilliant and awesome in the experimentalism that this album delivered highly in this form of hip-hop's history, the whole thing about hip-hop entirely. Danny Brown's Atrocity Exhibition is really one of those albums that I would definitely seek out as one of the best and cleverly done albums in this hip-hop's turn of experimentalism. The next album, Carcass with Surgical Steel. This album is definitely one of their best in a very, very long time, though it may not be my favorite because Heartwork is their best album, but Surgical Steel is powerfully strong on itself. The melodic guitar to the vocals and the stellar production, the drumming, the songs themselves are so groovy and pummeling that it can be quite thrashy in places, but their touches into the melodic sounds on their death metal tone is fantastic. Surgical Steel is, to me, one of their best albums by a long shot. Speaking of metal albums, the next one is Behemoth's The Satanist. And I actually revisited this album before I went to see them supporting Slipknot live. And this album was just insane. It was insane because of the aggression, the darkness, the brutality, the striking approaches into such a dramatic change of sound and vocals from Nergal were at one of his most beastly. The sound of the rest of the band was just top-notch, in full swing. this is still one of the strongest albums that Behemoth had ever put out, and I would definitely rank this highly as one of their best albums in their entire discography. Kendrick Lamar to Pimp a Butterfly. This album, the way that I think about this album, and the more I think about Kendrick as a person, in the way that he expresses his stuff about his craft, and his flows into the way that he raps with these hooks, and the sound of the album, it just makes this album a big statement. Lyrically deals on many things. Kendrick's personal struggles to the state of America, racism that's been highly troublesome for a long time, money issues, and the guest appearances are as perfect and well executed like Kendrick's role, with his flow on his rapping. To Pimp a Butterfly is a fantastic and brilliant portrayal into something very relevant, and this is still one of the modern day classics in hip hop today, like The Money Store and Atrocity Exhibition. The next album is Machine Head's Onto the Locust. I really do love this album still. Sometimes that I would pick this album over The Blackening, but the reason why I love this album as much, I think that this was a record that still builds and grows into some of Machine Head's best and pummeling aggressive tones of instrumentation, and this still ranks highly as one of their best, alongside The Blackening, but to others like Through the Ashes of Empires and Burn My Eyes, etc. Though I would see it as one of their best albums, if not for me my favourite in their discography, I would still highly regard this as one of the best metal albums of the early 2010s. Alestorm Back Through Time, because I regarded this album as my favourite of 2011, and I was so lucky to meet the band. It was just an incredible release. You got the fun, consistent energy that is just wild and very fun to listen to, and very memorable, full of catchy hooks, and the vocals from Chris were just brilliant. Some of the fans will say that Captain Morgan's Revenge is the best, or Black Sails at Midnight's their best, but for me, for my personal experience with this album and meeting the band, I see that Back Through Time is my favourite Alestorm album for those reasons alone. Gojira, L'Enfant Sauvage. Though I see that Magma is a fantastic album, despite it being a very difficult album concept-wise for the brothers of the band. L'Enfant Sauvage, however, I feel that this album is a better connection for me, as that this album grows as one of the stronger albums, and this has some of my new favourite Gojira tracks of all time in general. There is just a lot of its progressive darkness and awesome technicality to this album that they've pulled off, like the previous albums, like From Mars to Sirius, which is my favourite Gojira album. But I think L'Enfant Sauvage still really is something as immense and brutally deep. Black Sabbath's 13. And I know that some comments are targeting this album about the production and with Brad Wilk, and saying that some say that it's a rehash of the previous first few albums. But I think that this album is just as great. I thought some of the material on this album, yes, being very similar to the first few albums, very catchy and highly memorable in my book, with one of my new favourite Black Sabbath tracks. And Brad Wilk, I think he still did a fantastic job. He's no Bill Ward, for God's sakes, because I do love Bill's talent for this album, and being in Rage Against the Machine, another one of my favourite bands, but with Bill Ward, he was one of the people that did define Sabbath's sound, and one of my favourite metal drummers of all time. But I think he did it very well with this album, and of course with some of the classic down-tuned doom-style riffing from Iommi and Geezer. I think that 13 is just one of their best albums, top 10 wise, for my own sakes of being a fanatic of Black Sabbath. The next album is very predictable, but this is definitely a record that was interesting and that I still regard this as their best album in a long time, and that is Slipknot's We Are Not Your Kind. We Are Not Your Kind is an interesting album because of their take and experience onto the experimentalism. There's some bits of some drone stuff, ambient stuff, industrial touch into the later material on this record, and they really gave back some of the elements on the previous sounds that they've used before to this album. There is so much amazing, catchy, and phenomenal stuff onto the musicianship, to the production being the better produced album than the last album in my opinion, and with Corey's vocals that were so great on his improvement to the cleans, and the screams were definitely his best in ages. We Are Not Your Kind is still for me my third favourite Slipknot album, and if this is really the direction that the band's going to go for in the next few years, then I'm still very anticipated for that. The next album is Soilwork, The Living Infinite. It is a double album that I think this record presents some of Soilwork's best, catchiest, and intriguing amounts of delivery. The vocals from the screams to the cleans were sublime. I really like the production of the distorted tones and assaulting drums to the songs themselves that have a brilliant flow into the aggression, and their sound on this album is also excellent. And the last album to finish off this list, it is going to be Trypticon Milana Chasmata. Thomas's band project of Trypticon, formerly known as a member of Celtic Frost and also in Hellhammer. This band, with his originality to this album, one of the most darkest portrayals into the heavier side of metal music. Low, down-tuned, doom-style riffage to the instrumentation that sometimes feels really intense. There's some haunting atmosphere on this record, like their debut album. And I think with Milana Chasmata, it feels presentable in its progression. The production being another big highlight. That's one of the best. I love the production to this album as well, as it completely blends and fits in this kind of atmosphere to this album. It's just a record that presents you into a sinister and grim feeling. So that is it, guys. There's going to be some more albums to this list that I will expand it, and I will mention this expansion of the best albums of the decade list from me to you in the future, and share your comments on what you think of the list. If you have a list of your own on albums that you consider to be the best of the decade, please drop them down. I would really like it to see what your lists are. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.